Hello folks, this is Mr. Anderson, and we're just going to screencast this lesson so that you can either recap it or prime yourself for it. So as you've been said before, we're aiming to analyze the nature of Robbie's narrative voice so we can see the form of it and the change of it reflects the nature of his horrific experiences. The three key things to understand about this is to really recap his perception, how it changes, to understand how the violence of war affects the perception, then ultimately actually analyze the form through the use of a sweaty. Okay, so your recapping questions will relate to the idea of the different contexts and again the idea of the Proustian moment, although that's likely to change. Okay, so we need to now share the annotations for each section. So before the lesson, you want to make sure that you have annotated each section. Your teacher may have allocated a specific assessment objective, but it's equally likely that you'd want to analyze all the assessment objectives, but only across the 5 major extracts. So, why does Robbie's narrative change so drastically? What you have to understand about the left-hand narrative is that this comes from part 1, and this comes from the point in which he has had his bath scene, and he has intellectually had this Proustian moment where he has discovered his love for Cecilia, he has reformed his past experiences, and the description of the journey and the delightful sensitivity to colour and nature demonstrates his absolute love that is filling him with positivity here. He has never before felt so self-consciously young, nor experienced such appetite, such impatience for the story to begin. And of course, this is utterly tragic knowing what happens to him. And so when we look at the starkness of the narrative in part 2, much more simplistic, utterly lacking here any kind of metaphor. We have vulgarity here indeed. We have some repetition here of the vanished boy, the vanished life. And we want to see how the literate Mandarin style of part 1 has degenerated into the Numb narrative. Here we can see in part 2. So I want to give you some time of summing up your understanding of all 5 extracts. Again, these timings are subject to change. And then we will look at these extracts. So the first major extract contextualizes Robbie's numbing experience as a soldier in Dunkirk. And again, we've seen it before, it's his prison experience and just the absolute disgusting degradation that he experiences from this. And these sentence fragments as well, that again demonstrates a point of form. Major extract 2 asks how his perception has been affected by his prison experience. And again, we can see this idea of the vertical stripes being linked like a boy's pajamas. This simile here is utterly key. And again, this idea of his sense of confinement being not just physical, but also spiritual and lasting. Where else is there a sense of conflict that is connected throughout the ages in the context you saw in the previous lesson? In terms of the major extract 3, the question is how does the form and the structure of this extract reflect Robbie's perception of the severed limbs? And again, that's just a little typo there. And again, if you've watched, or if you will watch in a few years' time, the film It, or read anything from Stephen King, he actually has this very gruesome image of a child's head that exists in a tree after it has been severed in an explosion. So here we're talking about the idea of okay. Now here actually this is a different prompt. This one is talking about how the discourse of Robbie really actually relates to the nature of the class tension between Nettle and Mace and Robbie. So we'll ask you to focus on the class tension between Robbie and Nettle and Mace. So here we go. This is actually a fake meeting in part 3, and this alludes to the Numb narrative. And again, this is how Bryony imagines Robbie would react. How does this link to his Proustian moment in part 1? And again, how does this link also to the ideas of post-traumatic stress disorder and how that might be understood in the 1930s or not? And again, to what extent is this Bryony reflecting on her ability to understand her atonement or not? And finally, with the major extract 5, how does this reflect the desperate hope of Robbie? So we got the illusion here relating to the hope of Robbie. We can also see some of the alliteration in the images declared here of the Dunkirk March. But then we have this strange stream of consciousness here, huge long sentences containing pastoral images. And how is this reflecting Robbie's perception of his Dunkirk blasted experience? And how is it peppered with more sweet ideas of finally finding himself again with Cecilia back in Tallis House? So what I'm going to want you, once you have reflected on and shared these passages, to look to create your own sweaty. And if you look at another video, you're going to see an example of a sweaty based upon that last extract.